Um, Good. Let us move to the main event of this afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome Nick Palreyman, who is a deaf academic working in the field of linguistics, social linguistics, and international development at ILANS, ILANS being the International Institute for Sign Language and Deaf Studies at the University of Lancashire. It used to be Central Lancashire.
They did drop the central, yes.
Okay, no more central. And I had a brief email conversation with Nick over the last couple of days, and I'm very happy to share, and that's not on the website. He has been promoted to Professor of Sign Languages and Deaf Studies in September 2025. Many congratulations, Nick. Nick has worked in particular with the Indonesian deaf community since 2007. He is interested in Lebovian and third wave social linguistics, sign language typology, and we're going to hear more about that, I think, in the talk just now. Also applied linguistics and corpus-informed sign language teaching. He is a corpus-informed sign language teaching. He is a co-director of the ILANS Institute, and through this, he has a strong record of using research to transform the lives of deaf people, in particular in the global south, so beyond Indonesia. On that basis of his work with deaf communities in the global south, he won the Education and Research category of the 2024 Shaw Trust Disability Power 100 Awards, and he was placed 8th in the overall Disability Power 100 Index. So it's very nice to celebrate these achievements together with Nick this afternoon. His talk is entitled Towards Cross-Modal Typology, Insights from the Grammatization of Aspect Markers Across Sign Languages. Nick, thank you very much for being here. We're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I think I was just adjusting the camera there. Thank you so much for that introduction. I feel really privileged to be able to come here and present today. So thank you so much for inviting me, this historical society. Thank you. It really is a privilege. And I also want to thank Catherine and her team for setting up and getting everything working this afternoon. It's interesting because obviously a presentation in sign language with sign language interpreters, which is obviously much appreciated, it adds complications, it adds complexities to arranging a room. But we've managed to get everything sorted. And what's lovely is it matches to the cross-modal conversation that we're going to have today, looking at the two modalities and how the connection's there. So it's nice to see a connection in practice and in theory. So there's many, many deaf and hearing people that are involved within my research. And usually at a presentation, you see them at the end. But I wanted to start by thanking them because without those people, it would be impossible for me to do my research, to do my work. So a massive thank you to those that have been involved, and you all know who you are. So thank you. Language typologies. Cross-modal typologies. Really, this is a challenge. It's a challenge for the field of typologies because for a long time, we had Joseph Greenberg until now, thinking about typologies and the aims of those things, looking at languages of the world, investigating them, and seeing the differences and similarities, and considering how we understand and put them into a matrix. And so most of that work focuses on spoken languages. Sign languages have been neglected or been very poorly engaged with. And so cross-modal typology wants to include all languages of the world. It doesn't matter whether it's spoken, signed. But also, what's important is understanding that the body of work that's been done over this period of time has offered us definitions, and it's very, very important. When we think about cross-modal definitions, we're looking at definitions that work for spoken languages, but not for sign languages, and some that work for sign languages, but not spoken languages. And so we need some good cross-modal definitions. And so there's a picture here of my mentor, Ulrike Zeshan. And she started a lot of this work looking at sign language typologies and thinking about spoken language typologies and the relationship between the two. And this inspired me and the work that I've done. And so she is my Greenberg. Now, thinking about those of you that are here today, thinking about those of you that can sign and potentially some of you that don't know anything about sign language, we're thinking about today wanting to offer you bits of information so that you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And I think it's important to start and consider gesture. And we'll see that as I go through the presentation, we'll see gesture, and you'll see this again and again and again throughout. Now, when we're thinking about gesture, we're talking about pantomime or potentially beats of movement where people are using these patterns. We're thinking about pointing. So we're thinking about emblems. And those four things, potentially deaf people together, sign languages have emerged from those things. And we will see the hearing people that use the gesture absorbing these and using these and adopting these gestures. And you can see there's a real rich source of material that's there with regards to sign language. So today, I want to especially focus on emblems. And I think it's important to think about gestures and how they become conventionalized. And that means they're specific, so potentially specific words that can be replaced with gesture and that people would understand. So think about yourselves. What gesture could you replace? So for example, this gesture here, you potentially understand what that means. Or this, for example, you could point to someone and do this gesture. It's an emblem. We know the meaning. We understand. We're all part of that ecology that's in that space. Now, what's interesting with regards to gesture and how sign languages have incorporated gesture? When we look at Wilcox and how they identified the grammatical aspects, how gesture becomes embedded within sign language and becomes grammatical. There are two types. This is what Wilcox says. One, meaning we have a gesture that hearing people use that has been used by sign languages and deaf people, but it's lexical. And then we have one that can become grammatical. So this is type 1. We have type 2, which is potentially a gesture that has directly become grammatical without that first step, without first becoming lexical. So they're two different types, and it's important for you to understand this concept throughout this presentation. Now, I was looking for photos on the slides, and I was thinking in terms of a famous person that uses gesture, I was thinking potentially Trump. And then I thought, oh, that is the last thing we need on a Friday afternoon to talk about Trump. So I found David Attenborough. I feel this is much more appropriate to this crowd. So we have grammaticalization, something that we need to discuss. So we have this scale, we have this climb, the grammaticalization climb. We have our source and we have our outcome. This is interesting because when we look at the research, there's very little out there specifically regarding sign languages and the pathways that they've taken, those forms, the pathways the forms have taken. And so Wilcox has looked at some, but really, over the years, there's been very little research on this. And so thinking about how we can resolve this issue, we can bring something into being to resolve this. And also looking at what people say early stage grammaticalization and late stage grammaticalization. Early stage potentially being auxiliaries or free morphemes, and then moving to late stage and looking at affix. Now, people researching sign languages often say they're very rich in morphology, but it's simultaneous morphology. But in terms of the sequential morphology, there's very little there. So thinking about this, is this true? We need to have more research on this, more consideration about how that question has been posed and how it's been answered. So what did we do? We applied for funding. The AHRC and the DFG funded the CrossMoGram project. So you can see all these smiley faces. We see my wonderful colleagues that have been working on the project for 3 years, and it will finish this month. And so we are all very sad, no longer smiley faces, because we've really enjoyed the 3 years of working together. And I'm sure those of you that have met my colleagues in the project, you will see how much enjoyment has been there. And it's a really special experience, or has been a special experience for me. And there are some presentations of that we've done, that we've invited you all to. But one of the main things that I want to talk about, one of the problems that we talked about, was looking at these pathways, the journeys that these languages take and the journey that the project's been on to build a narrative for this presentation. And just one thing to add, in terms of the project, you may be looking at Creole languages and thinking, I thought we were talking about sign languages. You're right. I have been researching sign languages, and an expert I've been working with also works on Creoles. But today, out of respect, I will just focus on sign languages because my colleague isn't here. And so I think it's better that I focus on the area of my expertise, which is sign languages. So if you do have any questions at all, by all means, you're welcome to ask me a question about Creoles and I will try to answer. So this project decided to focus on aspect markers. And the reason for that was because we felt as though the different grammatical domains felt as though they had more publications with regards to aspect compared to the many other areas. Regarding grammaticalization, we have a good foundation. And so that was important. And so does that mean it was easy? No, there were many, many challenges. What are aspect markers? That's one question you should pose. Adverbial, or are adverbials and aspect markers separate? That's another difficult question. But also looking at meaning or implicature. How do you tease these apart? Considering areas of phasal polarity and those items there. For example, not yet, already, still. We have a very flexible approach to this. We don't discriminate too heavily. We try to incorporate as much as we can. And so when we look at these features, it's difficult because the research out there for sign languages, in terms of what's there that can help us, needs to be very, very specific and focused. So now some information with regards to aspect markers with regards to sign languages. And looking at the literature and also the native feeling, we noticed 3 different main ways that sign languages can show aspect. So the first, there are examples, and first I'll give you an example to conceptualize, to understand what this is. And so this is BSL. The signs are meet and meeting. Okay. Now, I think it's a really beautiful sign. When you look at how the sign works, it's really quite wonderful. This is a person, and this represents another person, and they meet. They don't meet like this, they meet like this. And so you have the distance between those 2 people, which is fundamental. And so you have contact, which means that you have an endpoint. So it demonstrates that it ends. And so sign languages can play with these spatial features, with how the 2 hands interact with one another. We have the space, the speed at which they come together, and when they meet, that action is finished. You can see within that form, the information is all there. And there's something about that that's aspectual. When you compare that to meeting, this sign here, you can see it's ongoing. There is no endpoint. We can continue to meet until I stop. And so there's no endpoint there within that sign. And you can see that a meeting could be of any duration. And so you could see within the form of that sign, it demonstrates a lot of information. Not all signs are like that. Sign languages can choose to make something important or maybe less important, but it's there and it is important. Another way is a modification. So the same sign, you can do this, which means we have a timeline. So you see the sign moving along that timeline. It's a reduplication of that sign, which means that in terms of conceptualization, to meet at many different times, to meet again and again and again. So you see that modification of the sign to provide different types of information, and that offers more aspectual information. And the last example is a segmental marking. For example, it might be the same information. So meet, and then to demonstrate again, to use the sign for again. And that is aspectual marking there. So segmental marking. I'm not showing that the same sign a number of times. I'm using the sign again to signify something. It's a segmental aspect marker. So that's the third way that takes place. Now, for our project, we focus on this third segmental marker. And why is that? So for us, we're interested in grammaticalization pathways. We feel as though we have parallels to spoken language there. And so that we can look at source, we can compare the source and the outcome, and then we can measure the grammaticalization that's taken place. And it's true, these other features you can do that with, but in terms of understanding where the source comes from, there's more possibilities with this third feature. And so this is why we focused on that. That's how we chose. And so how do people choose and how do they pick that material? And there's many different examples that we can look at, but we did need to focus. And so we focused on the third, because obviously we can't do everything in 3 years. So I have 2 research questions. The first is with regards to pathways, so whether spoken and sign languages are similar or different. And the second relates to that late stage of grammaticalization. Are there affixes there or not? And so researchers said that there's not many. What I want to ask is that really the case? Now, how do we answer those 2 questions? Well, there's been multiple sign languages looked at over the world, 30 altogether that have been observed. We've looked at corpora, we've looked at references in books. There's not too many there. There's some online dictionaries with deaf people that use sign languages around the world. And we tried to select different types of sign languages. We tried to pick genetically different sign languages. And what does that mean, genetically different? We are still trying to make that distinction, and we're still having conversations with regards to that, because it's not clear exactly what we mean by that. But at the same time, we do know, for example, that Auslan previously has contact with British Sign Language, BSL, because people from Britain went to Australia and carried that language through. So we know that. So we know there's links there. And so we've tried to be mindful as to the languages we pick so that we get a variety. We've also tried to look at various sociolinguistic parameters to help us be able to allocate the different sign languages that we've chosen. So everything that I've explained here is going into an online database, and hopefully this summer will be published, and you yourselves will be able to have a look through what we've done in the different sign languages, and you'll be able to see the information that's been inputted there, but also you'll be able to see the aspect markers from various sign languages. And it's very, very interesting. I'm sure you're all very excited by that. And so you can see there's different sign languages on the map, and I've put some names on to demonstrate some differences. So we have BSL. That's a national sign language. Deaf schools are important for the development of this for BSL. We have Taiwanese sign language. And deaf schools also very important for the development of this language. But this language also was brought over by the Japanese when they colonialized Taiwan. And so they set up schools there. And so when they did that, there was also an emergence in South Korea of Japanese sign language too. And so this has roots there. We also have Triestine sign language. It's signed like this. Trieste, yes, that's right. And so Trieste used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so deaf people from Trieste would go to Austria. Well, they were in Austria, but they would study in the Austro-Hungarian Empire rather than going to Italy. And so that impacted the languages that they used and developed. We also have home sign, country sign, should I say, in Jamaica, which is very different to the national Jamaican sign language because it's used in the countryside. It's very gestural. It has a massive influence from gesture. We have Balinese home sign. And this is fascinating, really, because individual deaf people that haven't had contact with other deaf people or very little, they are developing communication systems that they use with their parents, their neighbors, their family, their friends, and they're using these languages, these home signs. And so this has been incorporated. And so this project has incorporated all of these languages to see where this emergence and development comes from, so we can get a variety and it's diverse.
So we'll be looking at pathways and how do we know that a sign is from a potential source. So we're looking for signs that have similar forms so that you can spot something similar in the sign or something that's changed in the form of the sign. But the meaning is also important, the function. So we're looking to see if there's a relationship there as well. So you can check to see if there's any similar information in the literature, but it's a challenge. Some things help. For example, we've got a really amazing BSL corpus that was set up here at UCL previously. Wow, such a massive help for researchers of grammaticalization and the pathways. So you can see a sign in the sign bank. So this is an example here. And we've got some different keywords you can see that are associated with the sign. So there are different meanings, and you can check to see the meanings between different signs and see if something's happening there in terms of grammaticalization. So for example, the sign again, you can see here it says again, and then there's some keywords often. So that was similar from my example earlier that I showed you. You can see both of those terms are there. So that really helps us to have a foot in the door to see some possible relationships when we're researching. We've used parameters to measure grammaticalization. And they're from a German-based project, Bisang and Malchukov. And their parameters that they use, 8 parameters to measure grammaticalization. And that's for world spoken languages. We, over the 3 years, have been thinking about how we can apply these 8 parameters to sign language research. And it has been a really interesting process. We've decided that we can't really do the 8, so we're focusing on 4, which is more to apply. The other 4 are very difficult because the information is very limited about those other 4. So for the time being, we're focusing on semantic reduction, phonetic reduction, bondedness, and allomorphy. So today, I'm going to be giving you some examples from different sign languages of these 4 parameters. So we're going to have a look to start with at some forms and how forms are reduced. So a sign could be a 2-handed sign. So here's an example, ready, ready. This is a sign for ready. And so you can use those 2 hands, but you could drop a hand. So you could sign ready like this with 1 hand. So if we look at people signing, you'll see a lot of variation in actual language use, but you will see already with 1 hand and predominantly with 1 hand, and the source ready with 2 hands predominantly. But this has not been verified. We haven't got empirical evidence for this at the moment, but we are intending to do so. So it's clear that BSL has contact with English. English has its own pathway of grammaticalization. So does BSL, do we see the forms and the relationships between the forms? Is that change happening within BSL alone, or is there contact with English that's influencing that change? You know, we're using already, and the form is the same as ready. And English also has the relationship with the forms of the words already and ready. So perhaps that's apparent grammaticalization, or it's a calking. So it's difficult to determine which is the reason. Another example from BSL here is the sign meaning still. So you can see persistive. Yes, so persistive marker. We're signing like this. Persistive marker still. 2 times, so 2 touches. And the sign, the source sign of this is add. Like this, add, which is 1 touch. So 1 touch became 2 touches. Add to still, to persistive or still. And this is interesting because we've got a body anchored sign with contact between the hands. You couldn't drop a hand, could you? Look, we couldn't really have our one hand hanging in the air. It doesn't happen when people are signing, you know? Something feels just not right about it. You need that contact with the 2 hands and the hand shapes. Perhaps we can predict, because of this, which signs are more likely to be grammaticalized from a phonological perspective or constraint. So we've got hands, then we've got syllabic structure. So if you have a look at 2 signs here from LIS in Italian Sign Language. So the first is a perfect marker. And the second here is a sign that means already in LIS. I'll have to show you, the video's not working. It's like this. Already it means. So it's equivalent to 2 syllables with this movement, 2 movements, so 2 syllables. And then the first example is the equivalent to 1 syllable because there's not 2 movements, there's only 1 movement. So you can see possible reduction. We also have movement magnitude. So for example, a BSL sign, not yet. This one here, not yet. We believe it's from a sign wait, to wait. So you may think, the meaning has changed. Perhaps someone is coming, someone is not yet coming. So we're waiting for that person. You see, so the meaning is logical relationship between the meanings. But you can also see the form has reduced. A larger movement from the shoulder, wait. And then elbows are in, wrists are moving here for not yet. So there's a reduction in the form. And that's how much movement is produced to produce the sign. And we also have some mouth gesture for not yet, like this. I'm raising that because it's important that you understand we're not just talking about hands when we're talking about sign language. It's the full thing. Everything you're expressing, facial expressions, movement. Sign language has many, many articulators in terms of how we can produce language. We can do things at the same time. Facial expressions, mouth gestures. Things are happening at the same time, and it's really important to remember that. So yes, I did find examples of phonetic reduction, but also we found that sometimes there's no reduction. The form doesn't change. And it's the same for spoken languages also. Grammaticalization doesn't always have to have a reduction apparent. For example, in Liverpool, the BSL variation in Liverpool, they have a word that means there exists, like this. This sign also means still. No reduction at all. And it's the same for Japanese sign language. We have the same meaning pathway as well. No reduction. The sign is one of my favorite signs. Actually, possibly my favorite sign in the world. Look, this one here. I mean, there's a fascinating history with this sign that's just been published on an article, Sign Language Studies Journal, linked with grammaticalization in Japanese Sign Language, Taiwanese, and South Korean. So the 3 languages. And this sign is included. And it's to do with a Japanese cultural concept of a red monster with a very large nose, like this. So this is why they signed this. And the meanings have changed over time, and it's a very fascinating sign. And yes, this can mean there, so existential, and it can also mean still, persistive. And you can see there's no reduction. The sign is exactly the same. We haven't reduced anything that I'm doing with my hands there, so same form. Reduction, we've got that. No change at all, we've got that. The third one we're looking at here is augmentation. Okay, interesting. Maybe you've already spotted it earlier when I showed you an example of add becoming still. So add is lexical. Still is more grammatical. And there's 2 movements for still, and add has 1. So it's becoming more grammaticalized. So the form is augmenting. We're adding things to the form. Okay. So we're a bit surprised to find this. And it seems that sign languages have many examples of this occurring. So phonetic augmentation. So it could be reduplication, like we were talking about with the additional movements. And this pathway, the meaning pathway, we have it for spoken languages in the world as well. The same pathway has been found, just to let you know. Augmentation can be related to or incorporated into a timeline. So there's an example here from Indonesian Sign Language, and it's a sign that means never, like this. Never. This sign, the source is like this. And it means not there. So this sign, not there, the timeline goes behind your shoulder into the past. So it's going behind you. So it's moving along this timeline like this and still shaking movement. So there's an internal movement here and it's traveling in the timeline. That internal movement has been removed. Yes. And at the outcome is still bigger compared to the source, but it's also a bit of pressure. You need to keep trying to be reduced, remove that internal movement. And in my sign language corpus of Indonesian Sign Language, there is examples of that intermediate stage of people using that internal movement, but moving along the timeline. So we've had examples of form pathways, how reduction can happen for sign languages, and also some meaning pathways that we've seen. I wanted to go back to the question of gesture that we were talking about earlier in the presentation. We found some examples from different sign languages of aspect markers that seem to be related to gesture. Are those type 1 or type 2? Let's have a look together. The first example is from Jordanian Sign Language. This sign here. Yes, it might be my second favorite sign in the world. I'm not sure. My husband is from Italy, And maybe you know this sign is used a lot in Italy. I see it a lot anyway at home. Maybe, maybe there's a reason, but yes, you go to Israel, Palestine, Jordan, you're going to see this sign used a lot, or this gesture rather. And this gesture is from hearing people. Hearing people still use this gesture. Jordanian Sign Language, in Jordanian Sign Language, it means wait. It means wait, and also not yet, which we call don-dumative. And it's the same pathway in BSL. So wait becomes not yet in BSL. So it's the same pathway for Jordanian Sign Language. But you can see the gesture became lexicalized and then became grammatical. So that means type 1. Type 1 pathway. Okay. So I talked about Balinese home sign, and my PhD student from Indonesia, Satyawati, based at Tilburg University, and their research is looking at 7 home signers and looking at their aspect marking, how they're using aspect markers. And they found that different strategies are used to show aspect or mark aspect. So the first is like this. If you go to Bali, I don't know, I wouldn't recommend maybe that you go to Bali because the traffic is awful at this moment in time, just to let you know. But if you do end up going to Bali, don't go to the tourist areas, go to the proper parts of Bali, and you will see hearing people gesturing like this to each other. And the meaning is no. No or not there. Hearing people will use this gesture. I think 5 of the 7 home signers participants are using this gesture to also mean already or finished. So it's a perfect marker. I'll show you a clip. I don't have a translation here, but they're talking about the marketplace and the time that it shuts. So if you have a look, you'll see this gesture at the end of the clip. So we'll all have a look. Okay, so you saw that gesture, and there's a relationship between not there and already finished. This relationship seems to be apparent. Is it type 1 or type 2? Because we've got the gesture becoming perhaps grammatical, but with a negative meaning, and then becoming aspectual, an aspectual meaning. So, we think this is also type 1 because the aspectual meaning was not directly from the gesture. And the last example of gesture is from Jamaica, from sign. So I really want to thank my colleague, Andre, from Jamaica. And there is a perfect marker that we can have a look together at here in the clip. So there's 2 form variants to this. This one with 1 finger and then with all of the fingers. And you're blowing out when you're doing this, and then it's like you're cutting off the air that you're blowing out with your finger or hand. And this is interesting because if you look around at spoken language ecology in Africa, you see a similar gesture being used. I want to have a conversation with Hannah after this to see if she has spotted this in her field work, because perhaps you have, so we can chat about that after. And yes, we identify different sign languages in Africa use this gesture, both variants. So from 1877, there's a description, or 1977, sorry, there's a description from Kenya that means no more with disastrous implication. So we see from the meaning where we get the finished like meaning, the aspectual meaning from no more. So it would seem that this might be type 2 pathway. And the reason for this is because from the gesture, it seems to have gone direct to the grammatical meaning. We're still in the team thinking about whether that's definitely the case, but we feel it might be type 2. So maybe we'll think what you guys think at the end. You can let me know.
Now, the last part of this presentation, there are some examples of affixes, and we remember the second research question, sign languages and affixes and whether they have them or not. Well, spoiler alert, we have found lots of affixes within sign languages, okay? And it's quite exciting. Now, this example is from South Korea, South Korean Sign Language. I remember before I talked about how Japanese Sign Language influenced Taiwan and South Korean Sign Languages. And we have an aspectual marker, which is a perfect marker, this. Now, what's interesting is that over the world, you can see with sign languages, aspectual markers often have this going on, which is fascinating. I realized this in terms of finishing, to complete, to run out of something. And Japanese sign language has this, and this takes place in South Korean Sign Language. Now, South Korean Sign Language have a host sign, and the host for this example is eat. This is the sign. And so we think about eat, finish. So you can sign eat, finish like this. But how? Well, let me show you this first. So you see this? This, you can see it's been welded together. They're bound. There's nothing that can come in between. And when we look at sign language research in history, there's nothing that there's a lot of talk about clitics. And they say, oh, this is a clitic. But our team, in our discussions, we've been thinking, no, this is not a clitic. This is an affix. Because you cannot, in any other situation, you can't intervene between the two, between the host and the aspectual marker. You can't intervene between the two. You can't put any more material in between. So you see the action root being attached to the host. And so we have the verbal predicate there. So we feel strongly that this is an affix. Now, there are examples from BSL with translations at the end, and you will see the affixes here. So do you see this? Two signs, same and still, like this. Very, very closely connected. You see, still starts from the same location as same. The location doesn't change. And so you can't have any other material intervene between those two signs. I'm just conscious of time. We'll skip some of those. You can ask about those later if you do have questions about them with regards to the superfix. Now, the last few examples are allomorphy, and we've identified allomorphy. The first is potentially with regards to an orientation change. So Italian Sign Language again, we have a sign for no more, like this. But it, depending on with which host it occurs, you can change the orientation around to be this. We have hand shape change from Indonesian Sign Language. A person hasn't told me yet, so you have a look here. So this. So there are two signs. This, which means told, and this, which means not yet. And this becomes fixed and welded, bonded. And so it looks different. You see the hand shape change. And the last example is from Jamaica. Remember Andre, I mentioned him earlier. This sign. How do you think if the sign eat is with this, how could it potentially become fused together? You see here? And so you can see that something has been finished. The food has been finished and you're wiping their face. Yeah. So in terms of responses to the two research questions, the similarities of sign languages and spoken languages and the pathways there, we absolutely have similarities. You can see meaning that's similar. No formal reduction. But there are some differences. You see augmentation. And I don't know whether spoken languages do have phonetic augmentation and the similarities there. I don't have time to explain the superfix at the moment, but we think potentially there's similarities there with regards to tonal languages, because when you have a spectral information on the face and at the same time you have the predicate there as well. And so that happens all at the same time. So from Turkish Sign Language to go, but if you add this means I've been there. And so it's very interesting. At the same time, we think about the tonal languages, whether they're doing that as well. And gesture, sign languages and gesture, it's clearly important. But what does gesture have in terms of its impact on spoken language? Is there influence there or not? And I think we need to do more research on this. Now, with regards to sign languages and whether they have affixes, I hope I've persuaded you whilst you've been here. Yes, they do have affixes. And maybe in the summer, you'll be able to check our database and you'll be able to have a look at our findings for yourselves to see our examples that we've inputted there, the many examples that we've done. So when we think about cross-modal typology, I think our project, in terms of the impact it's had, the challenges for spoken languages, the spoken language typologies and fitting in with that, there's lots of areas that still don't have enough information for us as sign language researchers to be able to relate to. And so thinking about the source of phasal polarity, those markers there, we need more on that. There's very little information there. And also gestural research, we need more information on that. Because but that makes it a very exciting field, because you see massive change and we see lots of different pieces of information coming together, and we can make those connections and make a better world language and how we can make that work together for those world languages. That's it from me. I hope that you'll ask some questions and we can have some discussion, and we can also be in contact via email if you want. But thank you for your attention, and I hope this has been interesting and you've enjoyed the presentation. I look forward to your responses. Thank you.